Two from Galilee. A love story by Marjorie Holmes.
Last time we had just started Chapter 5 in our edited version of the book Two from Galilee, published by Fleming H. Revell Company, written by Marjorie Holmes. If you recall, Mary and Joseph had a meal together. Joseph came back feeling fabulous. As a matter of fact, he convinced his father to start on his way to ask for Mary's hand in marriage. But at Mary's house, things were quite a bit different. Mary's parents were arguing. Mary's mother refused to have Joseph as a son-in-law. Today we'll find out what happens as Joseph's father heads to Mary's house to ask for her hand in marriage on Two from Galilee. Thanks to Joseph's own savings, Jacob would be able to provide the marriage portion of 50 dinars as the law required, and little more. For the sake of appearances, they would draw out the bargaining, but if Jacob's suit was agreeable, then the arrangements should not take long. Yet Timnah shared her husband's concern. Baffled and privately hurt by Hannah's long aloofness, now it seemed to her incomprehensible that Hannah should suddenly have so changed. And yet it seemed equally improbable that Joseph could make such a grave mistake. It had been only this past year that he himself had seemed to be resigned, however grimly, to losing Mary. An abdication, in fact, of all women that was grievous in one still so young and vital. But something had bestirred him now, and while Timnah rejoiced, she had also been building defenses against the hour when the cruel blow might fall once more. Yet when Jacob came bouncing back down the hill, he had brought the hoped-for news. Joseph was acceptable. The terms would be worked out later. Let the wine be poured, let the family celebrate. And Joseph's songs gladdened the air above the brisk rapping of the hammer and the rhythmic music of the plane, the saws. He carried the children about on his shoulders. His sea-gray eyes shone. After the betrothal, I'll start building our house. That other cave just beyond the one you used for storage would be perfect. An extra room in case of storm. I could build our house above it, and we'd still be near the shop, and we'd be alone. Alone. In a house that would be a credit to his darling. He would hew the stones out of the hillside himself and fashion its furnishings. Already he had begun wresting a few stubborn stumps from the fields and hauling them home to be sawed into boards. He was dazed by the wonders and awe of what had befallen. She was to be his after all. To come unto him as his wife, to protect and provide for, and to love. How could he wait? How could he bear it when he had already waited so long? Yet each step must be taken in order. The announcement in the synagogue this Sabbath, followed by the receiving of well-wishers that afternoon, the betrothal in the middle of the month on the 4th day of the week, the betrothal which meant that they were man and wife before the world, linked by law, but not yet in the flesh. According to the customs of Galilee, that final union must wait until the formal wedding, which could be all of a year later, although Joseph was already determined that it must not be that long. His senses surged blindly ahead toward that blessed hour when he could, with honor, carry her into his house. How could he endure the months that must lie between the betrothal and the wedding? Yet there was so much to be done. Therein would lie his salvation, the house to be gouged out of the earth and cut into building blocks, the wood to be lovingly carved and joined into the things that they would use together, like benches and cupboards and a cradle. His hand trembled. He whistled and sang to still the mingled glory and fear of his own good fortune. It seemed at times almost too much, and yet paradoxically there drove through him the old intense conviction. God had never meant otherwise. God moved in mysterious ways. Mary awoke that Sabbath morning with a sense of something tremendous impending. What, she could not for a moment remember. Then the sweet knowledge smote her. This day, Joseph would stand beside her, publicly revealed as her chosen husband. Not that the village did not suspect. There had been rumors almost from the hour when Joachim had sought the rabbi at such an unlikely time for the ceremonial killing of the duck for the evening meal. Her cousins and others had accosted her with it the following morning, and throughout the negotiations, speculation whetted the appetite of the little town. Joseph and Mary. Evidently there was to be a match. But why? How was it that Joseph had suddenly emerged as a suitor, cutting out his rivals? And what of Hannah, the women asked, particularly Mary's aunts. Bursting with curiosity, they had hastened to see her, only to be met with the news that Hannah had taken to her chamber with so severe a headache that she couldn't see anyone. On the third day, however, Hannah sprang from her couch. "There's much to be done if we're to receive guests in your honor this Sabbath," she announced, and she set about the cleaning and baking with a zeal matched only by her fervor in now convincing Nazareth that, of all its youths, Joseph ben Jacob was the finest. In fact, the only one she would deign consider for her daughter. Mary could not resist a smile of gentle irony, but so intense was her relief that she banished the memory of her parents' bitter quarrels and these last dark days of sulking. Hannah was already up, rousing the family, for this day would be full. They must make haste to wash and dress and be about their devotions. She scurried about, giving orders, goaded by a wry anticipation. On the strong tide of her vitality, they were swept into the synagogue. The day was bright and sparkling. Light washed the familiar rose-red stones of the building, set upon the highest point of the city, so that none might look down upon it, its face turned east toward Jerusalem. The light enhanced the multicolored Sabbath robes that flowed into the place of worship like a wind-tossed tulip garden. Mary felt dazzled by it. Leading the younger children, she followed her mother into the women's gallery. A bustle of interest followed her. She could feel her own beauty, quickened and enhanced by love. Hannah was beside her, eyes lively in proud defiance. Below them were the men in their fringed prayer shawls, the women relegated to second position, and yet above them behind their wooden screen, like angels smiling down. Regarding the men who were so mighty, who had such power, and yet were as nothing, as lost sheep without the women. The rich male voices rose in the chants and psalms. Joseph was beside his father. Not far from them was Abner, who seemed, even from this distance, the picture of wretchedness. His eyes were redder than usual. Had he been weeping? Mary wondered sadly. Cleophas and his father were toward the back, richly robed, the gold on their dark wrists and ankles gleaming. She yearned toward them, too, roused and distressed. To be so cocksure and wealthy, and then to suffer this baffling indignity. What an outrage! Reb Levi had made that plain, storming into the house of Joachim, saying, "How is it that you put me off last year, and now you're bargaining with that idiot Jacob without even giving me notice? You must be mad. Don't you realize I'm prepared to pay almost anything for Mary?" Joachim's reply only incensed him further. "My daughter is not for sale." No, not for sale. This sweet, newly awakened flesh. Though had it not been for Joseph, she would not have objected to Cleophas, whom she'd always liked. He was engaging and exhilarating, that spoiled young traveler, though his way with girls was well known. If that handsome face was sardonic to hide his suffering now, it would not be for so long. But again it struck her as sad that love should be so divisive, lashing this person against that, lacerating those whom it must cast aside. Now it was time for the reading of the Torah. The candles in the 7-branched candelabra shone and pointed tongues of flame. The curtains were parted, the holy chest unlocked. The priest brought forth the sacred scrolls, ivoried with age. The congregation waited for the 7 chosen ones. Mary waited, too, in a soft dream. Surely today, my father. Surely today, my Joseph. And indeed, they were summoned, together with Jacob, in honor of the occasion. Joachim, on his heavy tread, to solemnly deliver the Hebrew passages, which the interpreter translated into Aramaic, the language of them all. Then Jacob, looking humble, yet carrying the peculiar essence of his jocularity, as if to lighten and reduce to their level the weighty words of God. And finally, Joseph, striding gracefully forward, his face grave, yet unable to resist one shining glance upward at Mary. His last words had fallen. He lifted the parchments high. The old rabbi arose, clearing his furry throat and plucking at his vestments. Expectantly the congregation leaned forward. Mary clutched the railing of the balcony. Dimly she heard the words of the required announcement. Joseph ben Jacob, well known to all here assembled, desired the hand of Mary, daughter of Joachim, whose lineage was likewise of David. If any here present have just cause to question this union, let him come forth now and make his protests known. In the stillness, you could hear the pigeons cooing and scratching on the roof. Hear, too, your own blood beating like the flutter of their wings as they wheeled off. Someone coughed. There was a stirring toward the back, and Mary's heart raced, for it struck her as not inconceivable that Reb Levi might stalk forward to make public the indignation that he'd vented on Joachim. Half smiling, the old gray leader waited a moment more before lifting his hands for the blessing. But even before it was pronounced, two figures moved to the aisle. Robes billowing, Cleophas and his father strode from the synagogue. Men surged forward to congratulate Joseph. The rude departure only added zest to their words, for they were mostly poor, and it delighted them that a mere carpenter had bested the richest man in town. Upstairs, the women crowded around Mary and Hannah, eager for details. But Hannah squirmed, impatient to get home. She'd been unable to concentrate on the scriptures for fretting about the food. Would there be enough to go around? After that little scene, no doubt the company would be considerable, and Hannah shrank with anxiety for the deficiencies of her little house. She had one terrible final pang at the image of those grandly departing backs, as if she were being forced to witness the literal withdrawal of some glittering fulfillment almost within her reach. But no, she set her sharp little teeth. She must cut the garment to fit the cloth. Joseph was all that her tormented pride had driven her to proclaim. Down in some dark, locked cupboard of herself, she'd known it all along. Oh, she was a vain and wretched woman, unworthy of this rare and exquisite daughter, this noble, if humble youth, who was to become her son. Let her be punished and shamed in the streets, if ever again she muddied the vessel of their happiness. Chapter 6. The betrothal had been fixed for the Wednesday 3 weeks hence, when the moon would be full for good luck. Each night Joseph watched for its rising, and often he was still awake as it set. By the light of the moon and a single saucer of oil, he worked on his gifts for Mary, a sewing box, a pair of slippers from some doeskin bought at the bazaars, and his table. He no longer sang. A great silence had come upon him. The music within him was too mighty for words, even those of David or Solomon. He could make music only with his hands, working for his beloved. You should get your rest," his mother worried, holding him with her bright, penetrating gaze. "You'll be worn out before the betrothal, let alone the wedding." And the children taunted him. "Joseph's sleepwalking. See, he doesn't hear a thing. Joseph's in love." He laughed good-naturedly. They were all remote for him, outside the borders of his private journey. He was on his way to Mary. He had scarcely seen her since the Sabbath, when she had sat surrounded by the other maids. Yet she was in his mind all the time, in his thoughts, in every fiber of his strong young body. He was awed by the honor of his undertaking, but he was not humbled. He knew that the gift of total commitment is never small. There we'll finish today near the start of Chapter 6, and next time we will go through the betrothal ceremony, and eventually something changes all that. The angel comes to visit Mary, and we'll hear that in future episodes on Marjorie Holmes' 2 from Galilee.